So we welcome you to the keynote event of the University of Mississippi STEM Festival. So the festival events include science demonstrations and laboratory tours at 10 locations across campus this afternoon, and a free showing of the movie Hidden Figures at 5 p.m. and stargazing at the observatory tonight. And tomorrow afternoon, the field station will offer fun hands-on activities for kids. And so before you leave today, please pick up a STEM Festival passport out in the lobby and talk to the visiting organizations that are working in the recovery community. So to kick off the STEM Festival, first we'll explore the intersection of science, policy, and politics in addressing the growing opioid challenge. We're now seeing widespread abuse of strong prescription and non-prescription painkillers in Mississippi. Opioids, which include OxyContin, Percocet, Vicodin, and fentanyl, can cause respiratory failure and death in high doses. So we invited today 2 scientists and 2 addiction experts to tell us more about the opioid crisis in our state and possible policy solutions. So before we begin our conversation, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bobby Pepper in the middle. As a 1985 graduate of our journalism program, Bobby has been with the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal in Tupelo for 32 years and edits the Lee County Neighbors Community News section. He's also a group leader in the Celebrate Recovery program at North Star Church in Saltillo, and he serves as the lead state representative for Celebrate Recovery in Mississippi. So Bobby will now introduce our panelists for today.
Thank you, Dr. Swain. Again, I'm very honored to be moderator of this panel. Very glad to be back here at Ole Miss. The opioid epidemic has been called the worst drug crisis in American history, and the death rates now rival those of the AIDS epidemic in the 1990s. And this epidemic has been especially damaging to those of us here in Mississippi, affecting people in all walks of life. And today we do have a group of panelists who will shed light on this crisis and answer any questions that you may have. And we're going to introduce our panel at this time. Starting to my far right is Clint Crawford. He is the Director of Addiction Services at LifeCore Health Group in Tupelo. He has been working in and around the addiction field in different facets since 1998. Clint has authored 4 books. The latest is The Prison with No Bars, a book for families dealing with addict loved ones, written specifically for use in treatment centers, outpatient programs, and as self-work for friends and families of those struggling with addiction. Along with Dale Phillips, he co-founded the RAINS model of equine therapy, which is designed to target and treat addiction and trauma. To my immediate right is Dr. Ben Banahan, is the Director of the Center for Pharmaceutical Marketing and Management at the University of Mississippi. He is also the Project Director of the Mississippi Medicaid Evidence-Based Drug Utilization Review Program. Dr. Banahan will talk about his work with the Pharmacy Quality Alliance to develop and test and implement opioid-related quality measures, as well as drug utilization review analysts that can help Mississippi Medicaid better manage opioid prescriptions. To my immediate left is Chad Clarity, and he is the Business Director of Mid-South for Addiction Campuses in Tupelo. Although an addiction to pain pills nearly cost Chad his life and his freedom, after only a year of treatment, he landed his first job in the recovery field. A 2013 graduate of Ole Miss, Chad has also directed community outreach and marketing, and has served in community relations, admissions, and drug alcohol counseling for several area treatment centers, including LifeCore and Oxford Treatment Center. And to my far left is Dr. Randy Watkins, Professor of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the University of Mississippi. He has spent over 27 years in cancer research, including stints at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. In 2015-16, he was an American Association of Advancement of Science Congressional Fellow in the Washington, D.C. offices of Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee, where he handled healthcare policy. So let's give them a hand for being here. What we'll do first is we'll have an individual time for each person to share their involvement in the opioid fields and in their line of work. And they'll spend about 10 to 12 minutes speaking about that part, and then we'll have an open discussion within the panel after that. So at this time, the first person on the panel who will speak will be Clint. So take it away.
All right. How's everybody today? I'm ringing. Like Bobby said, my name's Clint Crawford. I'm the Director of Addiction Services at LifeCore Health Group. And so, day to day, we are treating addiction. We have a 46-bed inpatient treatment center there. We also do outpatient services. And one of the things that we've seen over the last year, just from our own trending, our in-house trending that we do, is give you an example of kind of how this thing has kind of flown off the charts. We were seeing about 29% of our patients that we were admitting January of last year were opioid-related addictions, meaning patients come in, we have a screening system, and they say, well, my drug of choice is opioid of some kind, whether it's prescription or it's heroin, things like that. So it was around 29% January of last year. January of this year, we're up to 48%. And in fact, from January to February, just from that short amount of time, within a month, we jumped up to 55%. And so you can kind of see how that, it's really jumping up, at an unbelievable pace. But one of the things that has been kind of, the only way I know how to say it's aggravating is we're hearing opioid crisis. We hear that over and over again. And one of the things, I was watching a newscast a couple of weeks ago where one of the reporters was saying that, this situation has become so bad that now the government has had to step in and try to address this opioid crisis. And so just to kind of put that in a frame of reference for people, that guys, this didn't just happen overnight. It didn't just happen in the last few years. Sometime in your spare time, Google the 1914 Harrison Narcotic Act. 1914 Harrison Narcotic Act was passed to try to regulate the amount of prescriptions doctors were writing in 1914. Okay, so sometimes it seems like it's a little bit of a misnomer. Sometimes, now, granted, I will give you our overdose rates are through the roof, but the way we're tracking them these days says a whole lot. I don't think we had those kind of systems in place back then. So this has been something that's been going on for decades in our society that we're not adequately addressing. I think my friend Chad and I have talked a lot about this. One of the problems that I think we've had is the stigma that goes along with addiction. And that for years it was probably went fairly unnoticed by society by and large. But when addiction began to find its way into our upper echelons of society, and we began to find middle class and above people dying, suddenly it's a crisis. And so this is one of the things that, again, I said it's kind of frustrating for me. We've had this problem going on for decades. This didn't just happen overnight. We were seeing heroin epidemics going on in the United States in the 50s. So, none of this is new to us. One of the things that when it comes to, when you're talking about opioids and the opioid crisis is one of the other aspects of it that I see that's challenging to what people like me do, people like Chad do, is we have the problem there, and it seems like a lot of the funding that we're seeing is going everywhere but where it should go, which is treatment, in my opinion. I think we need better treatment. It seems like for me what's happening is we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money treating the symptoms of addiction, but we never treat addiction. And that seems to be our problem. Again, let me back up again. I said, what year was that? 1914 is when that act was passed. And so here we are again. Now we're trying to put regulations into place and things like this to keep doctors from prescribing opioids and overprescribing and things like that. And there seems to be this belief that if we'll keep throwing money at things like Suboxone and research on awareness and things like that's going to help the problem get better. And we're seeing time and time again that's not what's happening. A couple of weeks ago, I spent about 3 days talking to 3 or 4 different people in Washington, trying to get some funding together for our centers for a continuum of care. We are only funded for about 30 days most of the time. With some of the MAT programs, Now we're able to get about 90 days in, which is fantastic, but it's still not enough. And so I was talking to several people about the funding, and you'll begin to see these articles. CDC released $460 million to put towards the opioid epidemic. Yet I can't find any kind of adequate funding to begin transitional living houses for people dealing with addiction. Most of the time for people, especially with opioid addiction, you're going to find that it can take anywhere from about 18 months up to 2 years for their brain just to get back to a place where that they can truly begin to understand their recovery, to work a good solid program, to be able to rebuild insight, things like that, get away from impulsive thinking, and be able to adequately deal with challenges in life and things like that. And so a lot of times we're battling to try to get patients as engaged as we can, as quickly as we can, because we can't really keep them that long in treatment centers, and we can't keep them in a continuum of care long enough. You know, anywhere from 6 months to a year is what I would love to see happen. And Mr. Clardy, who's sitting out here today, we're talking about that on the way over here. What is the magic number of 30 days? A lot of times you hear that, well, treatment centers for 30 days, 30 days. Well, that has to do with insurance companies, because that's about all they're going to cover. You know, and so that's where that number came from. And so back to what I was talking about with our funding aspect of it, and I know we were just talking about the research and things that you do and those things, and there's good research that we need done, but a lot of the stuff is we need it to go to treatment. Stanford University did a study not too long ago about the fact that for every dollar that we will put towards prevention and treatment, we will save anywhere from $4 to $7 in back-end costs, meaning courts, legal fees, emergency room costs, things like that. So it seems like we're treating the problem in reverse. At the end of the day, and let me clarify this, I'm a proponent of Suboxone use when it's done the right way. I'm seeing patients walk into our treatment center now that have been on Suboxone 4 and 5 years. And when you say, what's your drug of choice? What have you been abusing? Suboxone. So is that really working? You know, when I got a guy that walks in and that's all he's been using is Suboxone, that tells me it's not working. And I think much like methadone, Suboxone started out as a really a good idea in theory and can be used and utilized very well, but when it's used any other way, it becomes abused. Methadone was really the same way. It came out kind of going to be the cure-all. It's going to solve our problems. And essentially what happened is we would have guys that walk in addicted to one thing, walked out addicted to methadone. And the other issue that comes with that is, again, you're only treating symptoms, but you're not treating addiction. And so until we are able to get in a place where we can really get down as people that, we're trench workers, I guess, Chad and I would be trench workers, to, you know, kind of that, where your front end people can really get what they need to adequately treat people. Why do you use? What drives the reason that you use? You know, how do you avoid the stress of life when you've always used to cope? And now we take that out of your equation of life. You know, how are you going to deal with these things from going? You know, that's what treatment is. And we don't have the ability to treat patients adequately right now, especially in Mississippi. You know, and we can see some of the numbers. You can see in 2011 we had 1 reported overdose death. 1. 2016 we had 211. 211. All right, Chad and I were looking at some stuff on the way over here. As of right now, in 2018, we have 255. So, you know, I'm a real simple guy. You know, when I look at those numbers, that doesn't make sense. For the amount of money that we're saying that we're putting towards this, it's not going to the right place. We've got to be able to adequately treat the problem, and I think we're only treating the symptoms. Nationwide, when you look at the numbers, it's estimated that 2.7 million people in the United States today are dealing with addiction on some level. Only about 11% of those people ever actually get treatment. 11% of 2.7 million people. And sometimes for people, there's this argument that says, well, Clint, a lot of those people don't really want treatment. They didn't want to begin with, and that's true. There's a lot of people that, out there that right now, for whatever reason, where they are in their active addiction, they don't want the help. But one of the interesting things about that study is that they actually tracked call centers over a year's time. 316,000 people called last year trying to get into treatment centers to get help with their addiction and could not do it because they either didn't have adequate insurance, they didn't have a Medicaid, they didn't have a pay source, those kind of things. And so when I see those kind of numbers and I look at the funding and where the funding is going, that stresses a guy like me out, because we have a 46-bed center right now. When I left this morning, we had 45 beds full. I could build 10, 20-bed wings next week and have them full within 2 weeks. That's how high the demand is. So I think we have to rethink how we're approaching it, what we're really calling the problem. When you talk to people who are in recovery, and you talk to people who day in, day out treat addiction, they all look at what we're doing and how we're saying we're approaching this thing, and everybody goes, this isn't working. It's not working. And so moving forward, I think it would serve us well if we really want to attack this problem, if we rethink where we're placing our funding now. How are we approaching treating the situation that we have? One of the other problems, one of the big challenges for a person like me, and a lot of friends that I have that work in administrative positions and director positions across the country say, yeah, Clint, I can't get help. I can't get trained staff. And that's one of the problems that I deal with. I'll give you an example. NPR did a report last year about addiction therapists. 1 in 4 quit within 2 years. 1 in 4. And I don't mean they don't quit LifeCore and go to addiction campuses to change jobs. They get completely out of it because it's so stressful. One of the problems that I hear from my therapist where I'm at all the time is just the pay. Addiction therapy is a different animal, and it can be very stressful, and you're dealing every day with a lot of denial and resistance and things like that, and it burns people out. And so when you're going to work every day and you're dealing with people whose lives have just everything's crashing and burning, that can be very stressful for you. But when you can't even get paid enough to keep from having to worry about how I'm going to feed my family, then you've got a double stressor. And nobody's going to want to stay in that very long. On top of that, one of the problems that we have is just a lack of good, solid training. But what I was going to tell you about LifeCore, right now at LifeCore, I have 4 inpatient therapists that have all been there less than a year and a half. Turnover rate's phenomenal in that field. And you see that pretty much across the board everywhere you go, is can't keep therapists, The other issue that you have too when you're talking about training is that, I'll give you an example for me. When I was going through the second master's program that I was in, I had to do with counseling. I had 2 classes that dealt with addiction. One was psychopharmacology, the other was addiction in American society. Psychopharmacology basically just was pages and pages of drugs and what they do to you. And the other one was a whole lot of percentages. And that was about all there was to it. And it also threw in a few modalities that we believed to work with treating addiction. Never anything about treating addiction, though. Nothing about the denial system and how denial turns into delusion. And what about the family aspect of it? Have an addict that's in active addiction, you have a family that is just as sick, just in a different way, because they're trying to deal with this, this horrible problem that has come up. And
If you could just go ahead and wrap it up because
Yeah.
we're counting about up.
yeah, sure. So that would be one of the biggest things. As far as Mississippi itself, there's one university in the state that has anything specifically tied to training about addiction. So, we're sending therapists out in the field that they're really not prepared. And I think we need to do a better job with that. I think a lot of our funding could be better served with a lot better education, direct education and approach. So,
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you. Dr. Banahan?
Yeah, I'm Ben Banahan. I run a research program over in the School of Pharmacy where we do basically health outcomes research, which is we analyze claims data from Medicaid, Medicare, and things like that. About 7 years ago, we started doing the retrospective drug utilization review for Mississippi Medicaid, which is a great big word for saying that we really run what happened already after it's happened. We look at it and help them try to figure out how we can make changes to get more appropriate care to people and make sure things are not misused or overused or abused and things like that. Let's see, I guess it was about 2.5 years ago, when the Centers for Disease Control came out with their draft guidelines for treating chronic pain, which is predominantly what the prescribed opioids are used for today. We basically, as part of what we did for Medicaid, we took all of those recommendations and looked at the prescribing patterns for the prior year to help them assess how were we doing if that was a report card. Where were we doing okay and where did we really need to do improvements if you adopted their guidelines as the way standard of care ought to be. And what we've been doing with Medicaid, and a lot of times you'll hear me say we because we work as a partner to them really more so than a vendor. And we oftentimes think of ourselves as Medicaid even though we're not. But we've been spending about 2 years now trying to put in place prescription edits, things to help get rid of the problem in terms of how we prescribe opioids, and also at the same time trying to find ways to extend the coverage. We were talking before we started about the whole idea of the limitations on coverage for treatment for people that are already addicted. And I point out both of those because one of the ways we approach it, I do CE programs for health professionals on the opioid epidemic. Part of why it suddenly got labeled an epidemic was when we reached the point that more people died of opioid overdose every year than from car accidents, it became the leading cause of accidental death. Okay, now we're not talking cardiovascular things and stuff. It was the leading cause of accidental death. That was when, and if you look at this thing plotted, if we were showing slides, you'll see that graph goes like this. And it has not slowed down. It's almost exponentially increasing the number of people that are dying from opioid overdoses every year. Now, as it was mentioned, one of the things that I always tell people, this didn't happen overnight and it won't get fixed overnight, okay? In the 90s, when they came out with all the new synthetic narcotic products that were gonna, quote, be non-addictive, you can go back and look at the history of the literature through the 90s, and many of the medical groups were advocating that these new products were non-addicting. Only a few people got addicted. Okay, and so they extrapolated that to the product itself wasn't addictive, it was just some people were addictive, okay, which is somewhat true, but it's a little bit bigger problem than they alluded to. And so we marketed those products, and simultaneously with that trend in all the new products that came out was all of the medical groups were advocating paying should become the fifth vital sign that should be monitored by every single doctor in every single patient visit, and it should be fixed. Okay? I don't know if any of you have ever had major surgery in a hospital prior to 2 years ago, but in the decade before that, you were subjected to the happy face rating scale. Okay? They would come in your room immediately after surgery, show you the scale, the smiley face and the frowny face, and tell me where you are, because their accreditation group judged them on how many smiley faces they got. So what did they do? They gave you a narcotic pain medicine immediately after you woke up from surgery. And they came in there every time the dosing said it was okay. We even invented the morphine pump so that you could give it to yourself as soon as the time had elapsed, okay, to allow you to get the maximum amount of therapy so you'd have a smiley face. I did marketing research commercially for 7 years, and I was doing some work on a narcotic product, on a reformulation to make it not quite, as easily abused. And we were interviewing ER physicians, and I asked one of them, we were talking about, the different attributes of a rapid onset or a long onset in terms of how fast it worked and how long it worked. And I had a guy look at me, he says, here's what the perfect pain pill would be. Immediate onset. I give it to you, and the smiley face hits immediately. And by the time you get to your car in the parking lot, it wore off. He just wanted to, he said, it's horrible. I have to do my rating scale, and I got to worry about that, and I know what's happening after they get in the car and go home. And he says, and there's nothing that you could really do about it because the hospital's judging his ratings. So the healthcare system spent probably 15 to 20, probably a good 15 years promoting the idea that nobody's supposed to hurt. We're supposed to be pain-free. We have taught people not to be stoic. We've taught them to think, I can take a pill and quit hurting. And we also fooled a bunch of physicians into believing that these products were non-addictive, so we write them like crazy, okay? U.S. population, I think the figure is 4% of the world population, we're 90% of the opioid prescribing in the world. That's how bad our healthcare system is in terms of getting a little bit too fascinated with curing pain. So what we do with our research, what I work with Medicaid on, and what we talk to providers about, is there's two things we've got to do. The healthcare system has got to quit creating addicts, okay? I have a niece that's an addict. She became an addict at 16. She had an ACL injury. After her surgery, the doctor wrote her a 30-day supply. If he had done anything at all to look at her family history, he would have known that every single member of her father's family was an addict, alcohol or drugs. She is genetically predisposed to be an addict, and she has never been clean since she was 16 years old, except for a few times that we've gotten her through treatment. Usually she's walked out before it was over. If she got to the end, it didn't last, okay? Because the underlying cause hadn't really been dealt with. We've dealt with the symptoms a few times, but until you can fix the other part. We need to quit creating addicts. We need to reteach the healthcare system how to do it, okay? And we need to start figuring out how to take care of and treat the addicts we already have, okay? And the solution to that is not necessarily stop producing narcotics tomorrow, okay? Because they'll go find something else for one thing, but there are legitimate needs for these products if they're used appropriately. One of the things that we're looking at right now, and it's part of what the regulations that every single payer is looking at right now, is the first prescription not being for more than 3 or 7 days at the most. There are lots of papers out there now that show the longer the first prescription was in terms of number of days, the greater the percentage of people that 1 and 2 years later are still taking narcotics. That they get dependent and addicted right away. Okay? So we've got to teach doctors to quit. I spent more time with my physician recently. I tore my back up in junior high and had to quit playing sports. And fortunately, the cure back then wasn't just throw narcotics at me. But I've lived with pain all my life. Okay? I've got arthritis in too many places to deal with, but to not think I'm going to hurt every day. And recently, I had my physician sit down and counsel me for 20 minutes because I've been taking NSAIDs, ibuprofen, things like that. I've been taking every NSAID there's been on the market since I was in junior high school. And guess what? They have a slight increase in cardiovascular problems. And he was so concerned about, he said, you don't have any signs, symptoms, or history of cardiovascular problems. You don't have high blood pressure. You don't have any of these issues. But I think we ought to quit. And he wanted to write me a narcotic. That was going to take care of the pain I was dealing with. And I had to sit, and I thought, one, it was amazing. That was the longest I'd ever had a physician talk to me about my medications in my life. Okay? And he was all hooked up on the possible downsides of taking ibuprofen or naproxen or something like that, okay, and for long periods of time. And his solution was, I'll give you a narcotic to cover the pain up. Not treat the inflammation, which is what causes the pain, but I'm going to go to the symptoms, okay? And I couldn't talk him out of it. He wrote it, and I told him, I said, you can write it, I won't fill it. I said, I'm not going to do it. I said, I'm going to still take my NSAIDs. I'd rather die of a heart attack a couple of years earlier than I could have gotten away with than be a drug addict all my life, okay? I'm not going to go down that path. There's no need to. That's what we're dealing with, and that's what we do in our research and everything is really we try to figure out, we do a lot of analysis of where are we and how well are we doing. I work with the Pharmacy Quality Alliance, and they are developing quality measures that are used for payers for the managed care programs, okay, and CMS adopts them for Medicaid and Medicare. And we've got about 4 opioid-related measures that we're looking at. And with all of those, what we do is we help them test them. We test them in national Medicare data so they can see how those measures perform, so they can get them endorsed, and then they get applied as a way of measuring quality that the payers are dealing with, okay? And if you start, when CMS says this is a quality measure, and it affects your bonus payment at the end of the year, it gets a lot of people's attention, okay? And that's one way we can change it. But we work on that, and then we work a lot on trying to use the data that we have to figure out what's happening so we can go out and try to educate the providers that are out there who really are kind of naive, and they're still practicing the way they were brainwashed, in a sense, to believe they should have practiced for about 15 or 20 years. And then all of a sudden, everybody's telling them, let's do it differently.
Branham, if you're about finished, or you got about another minute.
No, that's okay. I'll give you your time back. As they say it at the pharmacy and therapeutics meeting.
I appreciate you sharing. Thank you very much, sir. Chad?
I'm not sure what to say now. Pretty much stroked the nail on the head. I get asked to do stuff like this with really smart, well-educated people, and I'm like, I never knew messing my life up so bad would be so beneficial. I think the best thing I can do, and I do a lot of disease concept talks and a lot of blah, 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 right? And so I think the thing that's probably most helpful today is kind of give you a field level view and really just talk a little bit about myself personally and really give you tangible empirical evidence of everything that the doctor and Clint have shared. 1999, senior in high school, knee cut in 4 different places, a nice, 60 Percocet prescription, history, no assessment done on, Do you have a family history of addiction? You know, do you have a, you know, my mother, if you shake my family tree on my mom's side, a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics fall out. We're very smart, well put together, educated, very good, awful sick human beings, you know? And a lot of families fall in that category, and they don't know it. They don't really realize it. It didn't take me long to revert to every way that you can use it with needles and everything that goes with that. Then I was breaking into your house and taking your stuff and everything that goes with that. And got clean when I was 23. I'm 37 now. And some things that I've seen, you're exactly right about, you know, the pain scale, that thing. It was another thing that started happening during that time period was pharmaceutical companies began shaming the hell out of the physicians. Like, that's basically what you said, and you're talking about bonuses and everything that goes with that at the end of the year, quality measures. But the pharmaceutical company, they're very smart. They're a smart bunch, you know, and they did a good job. They did their job for sure. Made a lot of money, and so it was so funny when I began researching through the years that at that time period, that's what happened, you know. But you're right, though. You know, the disease of addiction, I would have found something, right? Because I just have that little thing inside me. It's hard to explain, and a lot of us don't get educated. I do business development now across many states, and I have relationships with unions and doctors and referents and smart people. And on a regular basis, I'll have a physician, a medical doctor who was in school for 750 years, call me from an emergency room and say, Chad, I don't know what to do. What do you mean you don't know what to do? You know? I'm a little drug and alcohol counselor. You know, I get it. I know they don't know what to do, but they don't. Hardly any of them know what to do. On a regular basis, this past Saturday morning, one of the best psychiatrists I know, 8 o'clock, Chad, I don't know what to do. You're a psychiatrist. What do you mean? It's just addiction, you know? Are they not teaching you these things? No, they're not. They're absolutely not. The medical schools are not teaching them. Like we were talking about, might be a chapter here and there, right? We skip out on or something because that's for the other folks. I stood in a treatment facility with 46 days clean, and I got a diploma for graduating, shaking, clammy, and wanting to use and kill myself. And I don't think I hold the monopoly on that. So when we talk about treatment and duration of treatment, there's money. We talk about there's money. There's money there. I promise there's money there. My dad, who's in the room, he works for me now, which is weird. A little nepotism. We can do that with private. So, but anyway, he was talking to a lawmaker the other day. He's like, well, if we could just find the money. I'm like, y'all got the money. You guys have the money's there. Don't let anybody ever fool you into thinking the money isn't there, okay? The money's there. We have Randy here, the doctor. I almost feel bad for calling him Randy. My dad will whip me when we leave because he's a doctor. So it's okay. But he's nodding his head, and I think he's fixing to get into some politics too. And he knows there's money there, you know? But we kind of have to believe in what we're putting the money there for, right? I mean, we have programs popping up on every corner. I had a mother debate with me for 2 hours the other night about her daughter. All the warning signs are there that her daughter suffers with this condition, disease, whatever you want to call it. If you have a problem with the word disease, which all it means is uncomfortable, that's all that word means. Call it a condition or whatever you want to, but she argued with me forever that my daughter just doesn't, you know, if we could just, you know, what we need to do is get her back in school, right? We need to, you know, get her, in front of her preacher, right? Those are all really good things. The problem is it has nothing at all to do with treating the disease of addiction. It has zero to do with it, you know? And all that stuff has to take a back seat to actually treating the illness. Yeah, opiates has, if you read the statistics, benzos have, alcohol-related stuff, right? I mean, microwave society. Look, I mean, I can check my bank account, send an email, see where my wife's at, because we got our location set to find where each other are. Right now. Right now, I can do that. You know? And I think that the disease is the disease and addiction is addiction, but boy, we sure are in a society that makes it awfully okay, and maybe not okay is the word, but easy to get there much faster. I told you that story about standing up and getting a diploma, graduating from a treatment center. See, I was blessed enough to be able to stay in treatment up to 6.5 months after that. It wasn't until about month 3 or 4 until I made it through an entire day and thought to myself, I didn't think about using or committing suicide. Every single day, clean, I thought about that. You know? And unfortunately, insurance companies are, going, well, insurance companies have what's called medical loss ratios. It's a horrible term, but what that means is what they spend on us, and they try to save money and they don't want to spend it, and they're making a huge push towards, get them stabilized and get them in an outpatient program, and that's where that comes from, and the Medicaid-assisted therapy and keeping them on it forever, but I can't believe we're still talking about stigma. But you are exactly right. I mean, if you don't believe in something like that, I go in and do in-services and talk to people all the time. I talk to therapists all the time. I manage a bunch of marketing reps, okay? And I tell them, be very careful about the in-services with your therapist. And the new reps are like, why? They should. I'm like, no. Some of them believe in peyote and Indian circles and humming and all this stuff to treat addiction, and that kills people. So we have therapists coming out of our schools that don't believe in addiction. I see it firsthand. It's not something I'm guessing. I see a lot of nodding heads of people that's in this field that's been there, and it's completely accurate. Think about that. The people helping people get clean don't believe in the actual addiction. I've had therapists work under me in addiction treatment centers that once you get down to brass tacks, they really don't believe that addiction is an illness. They need to go do something else. You know what I mean? So boy, we got some work to do. You know why they were successful, HIV, AIDS, all that stuff? Because they raised ever-loving hell. That's the reason that they were successful. They got out of their basements, and that's what we have to do, and there's a movement towards that. I highly suggest anybody watching the documentary, Maxim Foundation, my friend John Shinholzer up in Virginia, whose wife is a lobbyist up there and did a lot with the Parity Act and stuff. I can't remember the name of it. Look up John Shinholzer, Maxim Foundation. Anybody, my friends in here, what's the name of the documentary?
Was it The Anonymous People?
The Anonymous People, that's it. Look up The Anonymous People, all right? And it talks about how silly we are. And those of us in recovery in this field, we hide up in our basements with our coffee and we don't talk about it, We just don't talk about it. Meanwhile, people are dying as a result of it because we don't want to talk about it because we stick to these anonymity principles. And the reason that population with the HIV and AIDS is because they went out and they kicked up a freaking dust storm and they made people listen to them. And, I guess we need to do the same. I guess, I need to do the same. And, but that's what we have to do, And if you're in recovery or you have a loved one, certainly don't be ashamed of it. Drug addiction is the absolute best thing that ever happened to me in my entire life. Because I would have never found out the things about myself that I would have found out any other way. So I know that probably wasn't the most professional talk ever, but there's a lot of smart people up here, and I just figured that was the best thing to talk about, and it's something you guys could really connect with. And that's all I got. I'm gonna pass over to my new buddy.
Thanks, Chad. Randy.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Randy Watkins. My field is cancer research, and so I'm the least experienced in this of anybody on the panel, so I don't want you to think that I know too much about addiction treatment, because I don't. But I do want to follow up on what Chad was talking about, and that's money. And as Clint said, this has been going on for a very long time, and it became crisis mode. I don't know, for a lot of people, I was just, tomorrow will be 2 years since the musician Prince died of a drug overdose. Tom Petty died back in October of an opioid overdose. So what's happened, I think, in a lot of ways, is it started to get out of the inner city communities, the poverty areas, and now it's affecting not just white middle class folks, but also people who have a lot of money and influence are no strangers to this. And so I worked as a congressional fellow in Congressman Steve Cohen's office for a year, doing his healthcare policy. And so I was in Washington, and when really this sort of began to emerge, and Washington, as always, is sort of way behind the curve on this, right? So I worked on the CARA, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, which was signed into law in 2016. That's literally 2016, less than 2 years ago, right? Same way with the 21st Century Cures Act, also signed into law in 2016. And I just saw that yesterday, Mississippi got a $3.6 million grant from Health and Human Services out of the 21st Century Cures Act. So I'm glad that went. I don't take credit for that. I'm just happy it happened, right? And so, but my concern after listening to y'all too is where's that money going to go, and what's it going to be used for? And I think that's something that we ought to all keep our eyes on, is where, when you get a grant like that, $3.6 million, what do you do with it? But when CARA was passed, it had an enormous, almost $4 billion budget that was authorized, right? So if there are any policy wonks here, there's a big difference between authorization and appropriation, right? So authorization is how much money the government is allowed to spend on something. Appropriation is how much they actually spend on something, right? And so the CARA budget was authorized for nearly $4 billion, and we appropriated about $1 billion, a little over $1 billion to that, right? So I know that sounds like a lot of money until you spend time in Washington. You realize $1 billion is not much money for a national problem like this, right? It was just in the 2018 budget. It was appropriated a little over $4 billion now. So and then the Trump administration has asked for $10 billion for FY19, right? So but you see, it's because there's a certain growing awareness in Washington of that this is a severe problem. This is not something that's going to go away anytime soon, and the amount of funding is going up and up and up over the years. And it's again, they're a little bit always after the party. I pulled this. There was a hearing held on opioid addiction by the House of Representatives 9 days ago. So they're holding hearings on this, right, about things that you guys have seen for, what, a decade at least, if not 2 decades. So, they're still investigating what to do in Washington. So we're a little bit behind the curve on that. So, but at least something is happening. At least things are moving forward. There is money being spent now, and hopefully it'll go in the right direction. I have my own, my family is no stranger to addiction. I'm from Iuka. There is no addiction service that I'm aware of in many little small towns throughout Mississippi. Clint, you're in Saltillo, is that right?
Yeah, well, Tupelo area.
Tupelo, yeah. So even in Tupelo, you got 46 beds, right? I mean, small towns like Corinth and Iuka and Tishmingo and have nothing. And so it's an ongoing problem. And so I just wanted to mostly listen to what everybody's doing here and talk about. My role here is just to sort of address some of the things that's happening at the federal level to combat the epidemic, which, again, Washington's been very slow to address. So I'll stop there and let's get on to the
Thank you very much. I guess at this time we can do what we call crosstalk in recovery. We can have this a conversation between ourselves about what we've discussed. Specifically, something that Chad brought up, a good comment was, how much hell are we going to have to raise to get the awareness? Do we have to do it on the local level, on the federal level? How much is going to have to change in Mississippi to bring more awareness?
Something I've seen, we've tried. I mean, there's people, they've had marches, and the biggest issue that I see, I go back to this, is you have sections and pockets of people treating people with addiction problems that have a different mindset on what addiction actually is. I mean, you want to see some bickering, come into our community of addiction treatment. I'm telling on us for a little bit here, but we are real bad about, yeah, I hear they do a good job, but, and we don't join together because everybody has their thing they want to be over or, do, and they want to do this and do that and advocate for this, and this one wants to advocate for that. And what happened again in the HIV, the AIDS stuff was finally they came together and had one huge coalition, and they went to Washington, is what happened. And they had a day, and there is a day that's in history. I don't know what it's called. I don't remember when it was, but there is a day that was had, and it was a big deal. It was a huge march, and some really positive, good things started to happen as a result of it. I'm sure that's any profession, but it's alive and well in ours. We have people dying, epidemic, all-time high, and guarantee you in this room, I could debate with 4 different people about our views of what addiction is and how it should be treated.
You think sometimes it's in the recovery community, it could be territorial?
Territorial, I think there's, and especially in the South, there's some dogmatic problems, to be honest with you. I think we have some dogmatic problems here, just my opinion. I think we have a big gap in the scientific community and our religious community, which obviously a lot of people turn to, okay? And so yeah, I think all of that. I don't think I need to say any more. Y'all can connect the dots, especially if you live down here, on what I mean. So that's a lot of what we're running into,
Well, I think you hit on a good point that it's a multidisciplinary solution, and our health system doesn't do multidisciplinary well. So you get the physician clinic that wants to run a Suboxone program, and our problem is they're not doing the counseling and the other stuff the way they ought to. They maybe go hire somebody, and then you get, it really takes the whole thing.
Or they, like you're talking about with Suboxone, because I see that so much. I was telling Chad on the way over here, I had this conversation with a therapist not long ago about Suboxone. They were talking about, said, it's been amazing with this Suboxone group because they never miss the required therapy sessions. Of course they don't. We ain't gonna miss the dose. Right. So but they measure that, and go, well, this is going really well, this is working really well. Tell them they're gonna get their dose either way and see how many groups they make. How many individual sessions. And I a week or two ago when we're talking about Suboxone, and again, I'm a proponent for it when it's used in the right way, but I see a friend of mine sitting up there today. We were talking about, I had kind of put forth this challenge for people with methadone and Suboxone. And I said, tell somebody that's on that type of program that you're going to give them a full-paid scholarship, full-paid vacation to whatever place they want to go. I even pay for your gas to get to the airport to fly there. But here's the catch. You can't take your Suboxone or methadone with you. You can't get a guest doser. You can't get, any kind of prescription that'll take care, and you can't take it on the plane. Will you go? And I have a friend of mine that said, hey, man, I went for 5 years. I believe it was 5 years. I didn't go anywhere. I have another friend down in New Orleans that talks about being on methadone, and he said for, I believe it was 6 years for him, he didn't leave a 4-block radius. Because if I get too far away, I'm going to miss my dose. That ain't recovery. Sorry if there's any English people here on the journalism department, but that ain't recovery. okay? If we're keeping people locked down and we're keeping them imprisoned by a drug, that is not recovery. Right? That is not treating addiction. You were talking about the thou shalt and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was looking over some opioid grant stuff earlier this week, and for one of these particular grants, one of the statements was in it is that you must accept Suboxone assisted treatment as a person being in recovery. You must. And anybody that knows anything about addiction will tell you that is not recovery. So, again, we're doing a really good job of treating the symptoms, but we're not treating the problem. And what the physicians, is some of the things you were talking about, I was really interested in that. Chad alluded to this too, where it seems to be all the focus is on opioids, benzos, sky high, alcohol, sky high. When you get time, look at the Appalachian Regional Commission. And they have a overdose tracking system on that site. And you can see the overdoses in which we're in, Northeast Mississippi's in that. Do you know that the mortality rate in the Appalachian region is 55% of the mortality rate is related to drug and alcohol addiction? 55%. All right, here's one of the frustrating things about that. They released some funding that was set to go, like you were talking about. It's funding for the opioid crisis, but when you call and you look into that, it amounts to, well, we will build some driveways and things like that up to centers and stuff like that.
And how much of that goes to law enforcement too? I mean,
Yeah.
like people, they use jails as just, people are arrested, they go to jail, they don't get any kind of therapy in jail.
Right.
And so they pay for their crime, they get out of jail, and they're just as addicted as they were when they go in. So it's the criminal justice revolving door, if you will.
That's true. Well, you hear story after story after story that guys go, well, this guy went to prison for 10 years and he went related to his addiction and he got out and was using within 24 hours. That's because nobody treated his addiction. All right? Punishment ain't gonna work. We've proven that. We have proven that. Locking somebody away is not the answer. I met with the narcotics division a week and a half ago, and that was one of the things that one of the detectives told me. He said, I'm tired of sending these guys to jail because I know it's not helping. It's not helping them. They get back out and they go right back to using. So
You force them to detox, but that's about it.
right, that's about it. And sometimes, with the stigma and things like that, we reduce everything sometimes down to a moral. Whether they're morally debased or spiritually bankrupt, and that is not the case. Most of the time, people that walk into my treatment center, when I sit down and talk with them, will say, I don't want to do this anymore, but I can't stop. It's not about wanting to stop. You can't stop. Well, usually without some big intervention, And so, until we get to dealing with that core problem, we're going to see this thing continue to get worse and worse and worse. And we're proving that nothing's, the approach that we're taking is not working. And, but I did want to mention, I don't want anybody to get the impression I'm down on physicians. I'm not at all. I think it's just like you said, they were trained, a lot of them were trained a certain way.
Yeah.
And hey, you're supposed to take care of your patient and do no harm and help them find relief. And they were doing what they thought was right. And when you got a guy going, hey, Chad Clardy, Dr. Clardy, I've got this pill right here that will help your patients, and they won't become addicted to it. Well, if you're a physician, well, why wouldn't you do that? My job's to make my patients feel better. You're telling me they won't get addicted to it. Why would I not do this?
One of my best friends, Clint's a doctor, and I was bantering with him not long ago. He said, you do realize that we get our degree in the practice of medicine, right? And we're practicing on you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's the truth, yeah.
I learned a lesson that day. He's exactly right. It's not physicians' faults necessarily. There's bad everything, right?
Yeah.
But physicians, they have a job to do. I go into office, I've had physicians' office ask me, will you please help us do some kind of pre-screening assessment on these folks, put it in our paperwork or something. They don't have time to deal with the confrontation. that it takes to talk to people about their addiction problem. They just don't. And so that's one reason it's good, that we're safety nets. And I'm seeing a lot more clinics go to an integrated care model. All right, I'm seeing a lot of private, small family clinics start to hire therapists and stuff to deal with that, so they can be referred there, deal with that. Other thing I'll say, I've worked in the private and I've worked in the public. This is the biggest issue I see with any decision makers. I'd be glad to talk to them about that. Biggest problem with grant money is, hey, here's your money. Now here's the 17 and a half pages of exactly how you're going to use it.
Yeah.
Written by people, again, that don't understand addiction, that don't know how to treat addiction, that don't get it. And we got millions, and we want to give it to you, but we want you to stand in the corner on your head and stay there for at least 2.5 hours, and then, how do you do that? So on the private side now, it's night and day. Is the treatment that much different? No. It's just places like Clint, their hands are tied. We make it on our own, but that means we're able to treat addiction. We're able to treat the disease, and it shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way.
Well, and you hear so much about individualized care. You need to treat the individual sitting in front of you. Well, when you're restricted the way you're restricted with grant money, you can't do that. You got to get what you can get, and hope, that your patients are getting something out of it. But a lot of times, I have therapists all the time that'll come and go, I wish we could just do a trauma and addiction group, because we've got 5 or 6 people that have dealt with a lot of past sexual trauma, physical trauma, things like that. But we can't do it the way this system is set up, because what do we do with the other patients and things like that? So, one of my arguments has been repeatedly with Medicaid and things like that, just put it on a per diem rate to where you set your therapist free to be able to treat the individual instead of a shotgun approach that's probably not effective anyway, because of the constrictions that you have to go by.
In my opinion, Clint, I do want to say this because I've thought a lot about this. If you had to say, Chad, the one thing that you think would make the biggest dent in this issue right now in our state, to me, getting down nitty-gritty, this is what I would do. I would take Medicaid. It's all about the Medicaid. Private insurance pays. They do what they do, but not everybody has that. That's indigency. That is what it is. But a lot more indigents can get the Medicaid. But I would take Medicaid. I'd move to a per diem rate, and I'd begin allowing places. You can still do it under a managed care system, okay? But I would start taking it and making it to where it covers detox, residential, PHP through IOP. What happens is you bridge a gap all the way from the beginning to the end of treatment over a 3 to 4 month period of being able to keep somebody engaged in intensive type treatment. That may not make a lot of sense to some of you guys, but to me, if you had to ask me right now, in the next 30 minutes, give me what you think is the closest thing to the solution right now, it's that. I think it's absolutely that. And there's ways of doing it. If you go back and look at do you know how many times I'm just going to say it like I'm going to say it. When I was admissions director, just about like clockwork, every year I would have the same Medicaid recipient come back to me time and time and time again to get the same treatment, to stay there 28 to 30 days, and then go back and what happened? Where are they? Well, I'll see them in 12 more months when everything renews, right? So doing it right the first time, per diem rates, keep these folks' budget $1 in the black so they can pay their folks, keep the lights on, and do good treatment. And that person doesn't have to stand there 30 days with the diploma shaking and shivering, suicidal, and still wanting to use.
The term used, IOP.
Intensive outpatient treatment, right?
What is that?
So you have detoxification, right? ASAM, Addiction Society, American Society of Addiction Medicine, they have a different criteria for detoxification, okay? And then you can step into a residential program, which is a step down. It's intensive therapy on a daily basis, 45 hours of therapy a day. Then PHP is basically the same intensity, except you have them living, like Clint was talking about, transitional housing at a different location, but you still have your eyes on them, right? The pink elephant's still being looked at, and they're not going and being diverted at home from, with all this stuff, work, bills, kids, that, right? And then stepping down into an intensive outpatient program where they can go home and come back to you 3 to 4 times a week.
Would this include any type of mental health type
Absolutely. I mean, every one of the public, our place here in Mississippi, we have a place, Massachusetts, Ohio, Texas, one here in Mississippi. We're Joint Commission accredited. We're a dual diagnosis facility. Every community mental health center I know that has A&D program is also a dual diagnosis or comorbid disorder facility, and they actually get grant money off that. And so absolutely, it would treat both of them. Yeah, I mean, because look, it's two sides of the same coin there, brother. You know, it's definitely two sides of the same, in my opinion.
Well, having been in recovery myself and have had treatment for mental health issues as well, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of the dual diagnosis of being an addict, recovering addict, and also struggling with like depression and suicidal thoughts, which I had a few years ago. It all kind of boils together, kind of works together, and so you need some type, not only the treatment for the addiction, but also the other mental issues, the health issues, that some of the things that affected you years before that eventually led up to that point.
What it require though, Bobby, it takes the decision makers to talk to people like us that understand this, have been field level, ground level. You know, we have an opioid commission now. It's great. I don't know how many's on it, 12, 13, 14. I looked at the list. No shot at the rest of them. I don't know the rest of them. There's 3 on there I know of that understand addiction. 2 of them are in recovery. And I'm very grateful they're on this commission. We need more of that, you know. We need more influence from the recovery community when it comes to that stuff. You can't, you know, we can't create some job, you know, because my cousin needs a job or whatever, or my brother or my son to come in and write some policy on a grant. But anyway,
And
I digress.
There's still I think too, it's driven a lot by the notion of what I've seen is that there is a chemical treatment for everything, right? I mean, it's still, I was noticing the other day, I was watching on television, you can kind of tell how bad the problem has gotten when the drug companies are actually selling a medication to treat constipation that's associated with opioid addiction.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
right? I mean, seriously, they've
It's
addicted
don't cut
you.
back on your opioid.
I know.
It's-
By all means, don't do that.
Yeah,
but,
no, it's
Yeah.
Right.
actually true.
Push it,
It's,
dude.
Well, and the reality of it too, and it's just like what you heard Chad talking about with, you know, that even at 45, 46 days, I'm still sitting there wanting to use, you know, and you know, for me, but with detox and these kind of things, getting somebody off of drugs is easy. That's easy. You know, if we get them into treatment, we can detox them. That's a medical procedure. Keeping them off is the problem. And that's where the disconnect is, you know. And like you were talking about, there's so many people that kind of have this dual diagnosis or comorbid diagnosis, whatever they're calling it these days. But a lot of times for people, you know, you walk in the door and get detox. And a lot of times for people outside of that realm, it's like, okay, well, we got them off of it, everything's good, hunky-dory, all that kind of stuff. But you know, that's just where it begins. And at 30 days, nothing really has happened. You know, really, you're really trying to get them centered and grounded a lot of times. And when you're dealing with dual diagnosis, things like that, they're feeding off of each other. So you have a real emotional upheaval. You know, this is real intrinsic problem that you got to deal with. And we're completely missing the mark with that aspect of it. Is that we're not really working. Again, we're not working on the problem. You know, we're treating a whole lot of symptoms.
Dealing with emotional retardation at that point.
Yeah.
Not only for the treatment for the individual, the family.
The family, yeah, and that's one of the, well, the book I wrote, it's called The Prison with No Bars, and that's really what it's about. And I'll give you an example of how frustrating this can be within a community service level. I think we're allowed an hour of family therapy that will be covered. You know, and so when you're dealing with a family that's been dealing with an addict loved one for 5, 10, 15 years, it's going to take more than a damn hour to kind of help them process through that. And a lot of times, all the elements that go into that, you know, a lot of times for an addict, a lot of the healing has to do with the family's ability to heal and learn how to set boundaries and bottom lines and things that come up like the triangulation that can go on within a family and those kind of things. And if your hands are so tight, you can't effectively do that. you know, then again, you're not really getting to the core of the problem. You know, where I'm at, we have a 2-day family program now. I think there's an hour a day, I think, that's actually covered. And that was one of the things one of the arguments that I heard early on when I wanted to begin that family program was, well, you know, you're not really going to get reimbursed. Well, who gives a damn? If we don't help these families, the addict ain't going to get better. Because a lot of times for families who are, and I don't mean that to paint that as that's the family's fault. A lot of times the families are just doing the best they know how to do. You know, I don't know how to help this situation. I don't know what I don't know. And a lot of times I wind up enabling, you know, and really making it easier for a person to continue to use successfully, meaning, you know, I can continue to use the way I want to, and Chad's going to soften those blows and consequences for me and bail me out, so why would I want to quit? And a lot of times families don't understand that. I was talking to a mother today who said, I actually have driven into the hood, she called it the hood, to pick up my son because he was in a dope house, and this lady, early 50s, said I was trying to find, because I was afraid he was going to die. You know, so there's a lot of damage and trauma that happens to families in that situation too, and they need treatment just as well. But you know, you have treatment centers that you know, especially in my realm, that man, your hands are so tied to be able to really do any good solid therapy with them that you know, and again, like Chad said, you just keep seeing them walk back in the door, you know, because we can't do anything with it. So. And that's what a whole lot of that book is about, is trying to help a family get better and see kind of what the situation is and take the stigma away, and you know, that they're not bad people. And I've actually had people talk to me and go, well, they get what they deserve and make stupid choices. And that's where that stigma comes from, and you know, how sad is that? You know, do you really believe people want to live that way? You know, and you're absolutely right about you know, being in the basement with the coffee. You know, I'm a huge supporter of AA and NA, huge supporter. So let me be clear about that. My fiance is in recovery, so I'm a huge supporter. But one of the problems that I see, it's kind of like going to church and preaching to the same congregation for 35 years. You know, you got to get out of that to help break that stigma. You know, at some point. And I know there's realms and things you have to kind of stick in with when you're dealing with that. But, you know, we can sit around and everybody that's in here can understand it all, but until we get outside of this place, we're not doing any good with that. You know, so we have to find new ways to do that, new ways to break that stigma. If you look at some of the studies that have been done over the last few years, and you watch situations like Flocka, you know, with some of this synthetic stuff, and you watch some of the videos and stuff, do you really believe people want to be that way? Crocodile that came out of Russia, you actually can watch some of the videos of where people would have their flesh rotting off, and they're still shooting it up, knowing what's going to happen. You know, now can you really sum that up to bad choices? Or is that an addiction that hijacks the brain? You know, to where you lose your reasoning, you know. You feel like you're going to die if you don't get that next dose, whatever it is, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open it up for your questions. If anyone has a question, we'll bring the microphone to you. Let me do that.
Hello, my name is Jack Hall, and I'm a student here at Ole Miss. And I'm interested to hear y'all's perspective on this. I was reading a couple months ago that the state health board was looking into decreasing the amount of time that a person could be prescribed opioids and similar drugs and prescriptions. What would y'all say the state government's role is in addressing the problems with the opioid prescriptions, addictions, and treatments within the state of Mississippi?
That sounds like you, bro.
Yeah, what you're referring to is the Mississippi Board of Medical Licensure has stepped in and basically taken all of the CDC guidelines on chronic pain management and some other things. A lot of the recommendations came out of the governor's task force on opioids, and decided they're going to write them into regulation. And I have mixed feelings about that, in that, well, I'll give you an example. When we're dealing with things at Medicaid, okay, there's the soft approach, okay? We see we have a small problem, and one way to fix it is we send educational letters to providers. We call providers. We do academic detailing. We do things to educate the provider to perhaps practice differently. Marginally effective and not very cost effective. You get a little bit more of a problem, and you can put things in to sort of do what you call soft edits. It's kind of like you try to write that script and you're going to get a little message, hey, you're not supposed to do that, but the pharmacist can push a button and it'll go on through. Okay, and that kind of curtails behavior. If you really want to fix it, you just have to regulate and say you can't do it. And I think what we're seeing right now, and this goes back to the comment about who's writing the regulations and who's writing the grant policies and stuff, and do they really fully understand it? I was at both of the hearings that the Medical Licensure Board has had so far on the new regulations. The first set of hearings had 27 different practitioners and associations that wanted to speak. They each got 10 minutes. We were talking a marathon. The room was set up. It was really interesting watching. I went just to observe. But there were a lot of practitioners that came in and started pointing out, you put this in there, but you didn't really define it, okay? You're trying to make it law, you're trying to make it regulation, but you inadequately defined what you're talking about here. And the other thing, and this was the comment he made earlier, before we started, I said one of the problems with the first draft, there were a whole lot of you must and you will. Okay, now you put that in the medical licensure, the professional licensure regulations, and what that means is if you don't do that, I'll take your license away. I have the right to take your license away and suspend it because you're not in compliance with the regulations. They had things in there that everybody agreed were good ideas, and the one you're speaking of is the idea that everybody's pretty much in agreement, because if you write 30-day supply out the gate, okay, a lot of people will have addiction problems by the time we get to the end of 30 days. They're already dependent on the medicine, okay, and they'll stay on it for life, okay. One way to stop that is, say, if you're treating an acute pain, which is what they wrote the regs around, you can't write it for more than 3 days, or 7 days, okay, and you can't do that but twice, okay. It's hard to put that kind of stuff into regulation, though, because then you're codifying it and making it a rule. And rules are black and white, okay? And as you've heard a lot of what's really talked about, every addict's not the same. How they got there, why they got there, what it's gonna take to cure them and treat them and get them adequately into recovery. And I liked your comment about that. I sat and debated with a group of addictionologist about Suboxone, and the idea of, at the time when we first put Suboxone, when it first came out, Medicaid put a 24-month limit on how long you could take it. And we monitored the data, and very, very, very few people reached 24 months. And if you did, you could still put in a PA, a prior authorization request, and you get approval to go beyond that. But the assumption was you didn't need to. And I had a couple of addictionologists said, some people need to keep taking a low dose of it just to get rid of the urge, And I was like, well, then you haven't, it goes back to this, you haven't fixed the psychological problem we're dealing with. We're trying to use a pill to fix that. Okay, and that's the reason they need it. you can't codify things like that. Now, is it bad if they take enough of the must-outs and make them shall, that they say, oh, you ought to do this, or, you should try to do this, and that's what the second version had a lot of. Not everywhere it needed to be, but a lot of places. That's better, okay? They're setting guidelines, which are different from rules, okay? But, I don't want to say they're bad for going and doing it because it needed to be done. The truth of the matter is, by the time those regulations probably get enacted, 90% of what's in there is already going to be done by every payer out there. All the payers are already doing it. There are hospital chains that have decreed that the ER will not write narcotic prescriptions any longer. It's just, they don't do it. Because that was a place people would go, because pain's hard to diagnose, pain's pretty hard to objectively measure, and if you come in there and you really, really are telling me how bad you hurt, and I'm a doctor, and I've got to treat you to get rid of your pain, make you feel better, regardless of whether I'm shooting for a smiley face, I still feel like I've got to give you something. Okay, and that's a short-term interaction, so it's a good place to abuse, and it gets abused a lot.
And some people intentionally hurt themselves just to get their prescriptions filled, right?
Yeah, but I think as far as their regulations, the government, the government being the Board of Medical Licensure here, there's an appropriate role, but I look at it, and this is where the quality measure stuff that we do comes in. Quality measures are kind of trying to say, this is what we're shooting for. It's not a hard and fast rule. One of the things when I work on quality measure panels, developing things, the hard thing for practitioners to relate to a lot of times is this is not a black and white rule. It's not a everybody gets it or nobody gets it kind of rule. It's we think good care looks like this, okay? But we know there are medical exceptions to everything. And what we're trying to figure out is what that normative number of exceptions is. And then we can say, you have a quality program if you're lower than that number, and maybe you need to look at your quality if you're higher than that number, but the number is very seldom 0 or 100. And that's the problem with trying to codify things into regs. You have to be very careful about believing everything is black and white, because it's not that simple.
I could just speak up. Ken Sufka, I'm on the faculty here. I appreciate the perspective from the clinical endpoint and the policy endpoints. My background is neuroscience and psychopharmacology, and I have a question about some things you mentioned about the methadone maintenance program and Suboxone program. I wonder if it's a policy issue where they're just kicking the can down the road. And it might be that it's too expensive otherwise. And I'd like some thoughts about, if we don't do that, then are we not dealing with other crises of overdoses, EMTs, emergency rooms? What are the other things that are really expensive that are driving maybe that thing? And I appreciate hearing what you think about that as either a state policy or a federal government policy, and it's obviously drawing money out of programs that you can.
Yeah, it does, and one of the great fears I have, like you're talking about, is, well, what happens if you do pull that out or whatever? Whether it be overdoses and things. And I think absolutely, I think so. I think what's frustrating for me is more about the structure of how they carry that out, Suboxone treatment and methadone treatment. I think that's the frustrating part for me, is because, again, I'm seeing guys walk into the treatment center and you go, what's your drug of choice? And they go, well, it's Suboxone. And well, where you been getting it? Off the streets. And, and that's one of the things that we're seeing a whole lot of is a lot of times guys are getting Suboxone, they're selling it, getting heroin, doing whatever, or using on top of all of that, things like that. And there seems to be a misconception a lot of times for people too with Suboxone, where you can't get high on it. Well, yeah, you can. You just can't get as high, and so those kind of things. And two, you run into situations too, to where, again, I think it gets back to, as I said, I'm a proponent for Suboxone when it's done the right way. Not a big fan of methadone, but just because some of the horror stories I've seen with it. I think if we worked harder at how we work at getting them off of that, in the meantime, if we've got them on Suboxone maintenance, are we working towards getting them off of it, and how are we doing that? Are we truly treating the core issue of the problem? And a lot of times what I'm seeing, again, is I'm seeing guys that walk in the door and they've been on it 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, things like that. And unfortunately, there are Suboxone clinics and stuff like that. And I've talked to patients who have done it that walk in the door and go, man, as long as you show up and pay them, they're going to give you your dose, And well, one guy told me, he said, all I've got to do is talk about how nervous and anxious I am, and they'll keep me on it. Those kind of things. And so, like anything, there's good practitioners of it that do it the right way. A man I used to work with, Dr. Folks, actually from Oxford, some of you guys may know Dr. Tom, that actually utilized it well and was very strict, and his goal was when you started on it, you were going to be off of it within X amount of time, and that was it, Well, those kind of setups are very good. But in the meantime, there was a lot of strict requirements, and even after that, you still were required to do some things, And I think, just the issue of how we're carrying it out has begun to be the problem. Not long ago, a person I'm very close to became very sick, and so required going to the emergency room. We're talking about doctors and physicians and the education aspect of it, things like that. Person goes into, and I'm standing there listening to this conversation, and the person says, I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery. I don't want anything, all right, anything at all. I am hurting, though, and had a legitimate pain problem. And every staff person that walked in, I'm in recovery, don't want anything, don't want anything, don't want anything. Okay. And then finally, the doctor said, well, I really don't know what else we can do. Let me leave out and go check on some things, see if I can come up with something. And so, about 30 minutes later, walks in the door and he does one of these. I got it. And so we're standing there, I said, okay. And he said, Subutex. Okay. All right. Now, you want to know what the problem is with all that? The person he was talking to used to shoot Subutex. So we can't even get physicians educated enough to even know what the difference is between the stuff they're giving patients. All right? Another close friend of mine is a physician, told me at one point he had this patient that he was working with, and some of us that work in addiction a lot have what we call buffet users. Meaning, and that's not, we don't mean it in an ugly way. What we mean is they'll use anything, whatever they can get a hold of, right? And so he was getting ready to discharge this patient, and one of the doctors one of this young man's doctors had consistently written Xanax for this kid for years and years and years. And, so this physician said, well, look, I'm gonna call this doctor and let him know, that he just got out of treatment, he doesn't need Xanax anymore, and got into about an hour-long debate with him. And, well, no, he's my patient. I know he needs that. And he said, well, he's eating them by the handfuls, when he gets them and things like that. So just an overall lack of education, I think, is a real problem. One of the things that we see with heroin is there's a lot of stories that I see with patients that come into the treatment center I'm in. It's not that I've heard about it. I see them one-to-one basis to where they go, well, for those clinics that are doing a good job and they're very restrictive and things like that with Suboxone and things would have failed out of it, and the doctor said, well, you're using other things. And so their next step is to move to heroin. Those kind of things, and so you see that. One of the biggest problems with the overdose crisis that we're seeing is people don't know what they're getting. There was a bust somewhere in
The
the
doctor
northeast.
wrote it, it's safe.
Yeah, if the doctor wrote it, it's safe, so I should be okay to take it. A lot of times right now, what we're seeing with things like that, car fentanyl over on the East Coast has been a big problem. But a lot of times, people don't know what they're getting. So, the overdoses are just coming left and right, because I think what I'm supposed to be getting is heroin, and actually I'm getting something else. There's a big bust up in the northeast part of the country last month where a girl was actually selling fentanyl, and everybody thought it was something else, and overdoses, 17, 18 overdoses, I think, happened. Yeah, so.
But another, to address Ken's point, is that the 800-pound gorilla in both the state and the federal governments is it's expensive to treat addiction. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper to give them a pill.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper to give them a
Well,
pill.
it's cheaper. Well, there's two problems, I think. One is the medical world is taught, give them a pill, cut it out, fix it, and it's, out the door. I've taken care of it. They can't think about that transition of care thing that well because it's not the system that they're really accustomed to. The other is, from a payer standpoint, I can count the pills, I can count the procedures, I know how many days they were in long-term care, okay, and they were in inpatient care. I can manage that, okay, and know in theory what I got. But when we move them over into psychosocial care, but I don't, it's a lot fuzzier, and there's a huge variation. A pill is standardized, psychosocial care is not.
Because the disease of addiction that we're talking about, addiction is the only illness I know that you cannot, for an absolute fact, give tangible proof it exists. You cannot take blood.
Yeah.
You cannot. So think about it. That's the reason there's this thing about the money, the insurance, and then that side of it, is because the medical, there's tangibility, right? There's proof, scientific proven fact. This is what it does. It blocks this, bam, right? But therapy, we have a DSM-5. I don't know what the hell that thing means. It's a bunch of codes that they put in and they build the insurance, but I meet the criteria for, I'm a sociopath, if I look at all the criteria. Some of y'all probably are too, But how do we prove it? So disease of addiction to me is the only disease that cannot be proven for an absolute fact.
Well, pain, and that's part of what got us here too, because chronic pain management falls in that category. There's not a good way to measure, is your pain real or not? And then it's compounded by the fact some people can put up with a lot of pain and have a good high threshold, and some people, if they get a hangnail, you think they're dying, and they're that sensitive. And pain manager specialists, to me, are one of the ones that struggle. The good ones really struggle. But part of it is the ones that aren't really good ones haven't really waken up to the whole idea. There's more than giving you the pill. I remember one time when I was first on faculty here, and I threw my back out. One day I picked my son up. He was in the floor in the bathroom, and I picked him up, and I collapsed over the side of the tub and couldn't stand up, and wound up going back in those days, the orthopedic surgeon. Well, I can't cut on you. You're not ready yet. So that was about the only thing he knew how to do. I can give you a whole lot of pills and everything, but there's this newfangled thing called physical therapy.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll send you over to them and see if they can do anything. It wasn't part of his practice. It wasn't integrated into the way he thinks of taking care of people. Now, that's a lot better now than it used to be, but there's still that disconnect.
Did your insurance pay for that then?
Well, actually, it was really interesting because I had, I had a private policy, and then I had the group coverage here. I actually found out after I got out of the hospital I made money, but because they couldn't coordinate coverage because it was a private. But that's another issue altogether. You don't get to do that anymore.
Well, actually, I was going to it's not really a question so much as just wanted to point out a couple of things. We're talking about if you take away this Suboxone, will there be more overdoses? I just want to point out, there is an injection called Vivitrol that lasts for weeks versus,
Yeah.
taking a daily pill. Physicians do not make as much money. It is also very expensive to buy, though, for addicts.
But effective, has been shown to be effective, yeah. Yeah.
And nurse practitioners, without any kind of special whatever, can actually administer it, I think. I'm pretty sure that's it.
And I do know that the maker of Narcan, that's the nasal spray that when someone does overdose, they can use it. I know that the maker of Narcan has contributing to the opioid crisis is making sure that all college campuses have some available to them. And I mean, like they've donated millions of dollars worth of this stuff to college campuses. So there are things in place. The problem that I have, and I'm in this industry and I'm also in recovery, is it's very hard to reconcile addiction as a brain disease and then treating it with an opiate.
An opiate, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The only drug they've ever used is Suboxone.
Yeah.
And so I have a real problem with that. And also, when it comes to co-occurring diagnoses, you don't even know a person's baseline when they first come into treatment. And if your program detoxes someone using Subtext and then they go straight into taking Suboxone, how do you even know their baseline to be able to accurately diagnose any mental health disorder they may have going on?
You don't. Yeah.
And then the problem too with 30 days of treatment is that's not enough time to get a baseline on somebody who's coming off of Lord knows what, and trying to then treat them. The one thing about addiction campuses that is amazing that they're doing, that I don't know if any other treatment centers do it, is they're doing this case management now where they follow their clients, so people are connected up to a year. And I'm hopeful that will give us the evidence that we need to hopefully hand over to insurance companies to maybe they'll start to pay for that, because again, I mean, if we can't keep them in treatment, can we keep them connected somehow?
Yeah. Well, in your physicians programs that are most successful run 85, 86% success rate monitor for 2 years. If you're a doctor that is dealing with addiction, and Bill Jacobs out of Dr. Jacobs, I should say, out of Augusta, Georgia, is a huge proponent for doing that because the success rates are phenomenal. But again, we get back to where's the funding for that? Well, we can't fund that. And again, it was cheaper to give them a pill, which, just like what you're talking about. Let me give you an opiate to help you deal with your opiate addiction. It's just we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot there. And I think that it gets back to kind of, what we've all said, what Chad has said about, if you really want to effectively begin to deal with this issue, you're going to have to talk to people that are in the trenches that can tell you what's working and what's not working. And I think we've missed that. We have a lot of people writing a lot of policies that don't know one single thing about addiction.
Well, even when it comes to pain management, I mean, we do know that if you take medication, your endorphins they kind of stop working, right? So how can you say that you're effectively treating someone's pain if you're doing a lot of pain on its own?
Yeah.
We're built to do that.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I can see that somebody might have assistance for a little while, but long-term pain management using pills is not the answer. That's kind of common sense.
Yeah. It should be.
All right, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of our panel. It's been very informative, and there's an information table out in the hallway, I believe, that has some other resource material about this issue. And thank you for your attendance. Thank you, Dr. Swain, for inviting us. And again, we're dismissed. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.